Luke 24. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared excuse me, and went to the tomb. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood before them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away wondering to himself what had happened. It's really interesting to me that these guys who were with Jesus, who had spent the best parts of 3 years with him, who had seen the horror of what just happened, and they get this report that Jesus is not dead, he's alive, he's risen. Their response is that it's nonsense. They just say, that's just nonsense. It just doesn't make sense. And, you know, it's interesting because in these days, and every Easter now on television, it seems that there's some new documentary telling us that the message of the Bible is nonsense. That all that we people of faith believe is nonsense. They keep seemingly finding new evidence to say that it's nonsense. You know, they don't find anything new. They just rehash old stuff and say that it's nonsense. And these modern secularists think, and atheists think they've really discovered something new. They think that, you know, these were poor old fools back in Jesus' day. These were just, you know, idiots because they were ancients. And, you know, they would believe anything. But they weren't idiots. They said this is nonsense, just the way the so-called clever secularists say today that it's nonsense. They don't just say that the Bible is nonsense. They say that all religion is meaningless. That every search for meaning is actually meaningless. I heard one guy say that to even ask the question, an atheist say this, to even ask the question, why are we here, or to search for meaning, is a stupid question. It's a ridiculous question. This is how they think. They believe that the part of us, that thing inside us that's never satisfied, that asks for meaning, that wants to understand why do we do what we do, what does this life mean, they say that that's just a kink in our brain that evolution hasn't ironed out. They say things like, you know, superstition is a magnet that pulls you in the direction of your beliefs. So when you're trying to find meaning in art or music or beauty or love, the love of your family, the love of your children, they say that all of those things of emotions, or trying to find meaning in God, all of those things, they actually say that they're meaningless. They're searching for something that doesn't exist. They say that belief, therefore, is nonsense. And that all that's left is for you to live by yourself. That's the gospel that they preach. That all that's left is for us is to live for ourselves and for no one else. Who would want to live just for yourself and no one else? Don't you know you're not even wired to live just for yourself and no one else? That's the gospel of the secularist. Is that searching for meaning is useless, it's meaningless. That belief, faith of any kind, whether in religion or even in love, even in your own emotions of love, is meaningless. This is what they say. There was an article in the Sunday Independent 2 weeks ago, and it was entitled, it was answering this question, what's wrong with the Irish? I thought when I read that, why are we always asking what's wrong with the Irish? We're always kind of knocking ourselves and trying to figure out what's wrong with the Irish. Why are we wrong? And they asked lots of questions. They said, we're Egypts, we're all liars, that we've got this silly Irish pride. It's, our clothes, what we wear, various other things. We hate each other, on and on. They seem to find loads and loads of things. And then I found this thing where they spoke about a God-shaped hole. This man wrote that this is something that's wrong now with Ireland, that there's this God-shaped hole. His name is Pádraig McKiernan. He's like an art critic. He's like he reviews movies and art and so on. He's an agnostic. An agnostic is not necessarily an atheist. He's not necessarily a believer. He's just somebody who is at least honest enough to say, I haven't figured it all out yet. But he was watching the Late Late Show, or one of these shows, and he seen this guy Googie, who was part of Bono's gang. You remember that gang, The Village? And Googie goes to Grace Baptist Church down in Pearse Street, and has done pretty much since, I guess, Chris Rowe and all those guys were in Chris's church. And as part of his interview, he's putting his art up, and he's described himself as having a simple Christian faith. And this really struck this guy, Pádraig, when he watched this. It really impacted him that someone as cool as Googie could say on television, in the face of such a massive tide of smart aleckness, is what I kind of call it, really. This kind of smart aleck ideas that faith and belief is meaningless, was able to say he had a simple Christian faith. This is what this man wrote. He said, under the burden of talking about Ireland and asking the question, what's wrong with Ireland? He said, under the burden of dead anxiety, promissory note fatigue, and Eddie Hobbs, it is a burden. Under the burden of all of these people, he says, the nation is reaching a psychological tipping point. And I thought that was really interesting. He says, there's a queue of public figures lining up to tell us how awful we are. I won't list them, he went into them. He said, to relieve our anxiety as a society, and the epidemic levels of alienation we all feel. And that's an interesting thing. We have, I think, this is the highest suicide rate in all of Europe. And this thing of alienation means where once as a society we had a fabric that was a Catholic fabric. We were woven together into the idea of being a Catholic, of being a person of faith, and all that meant. It tied us together, it knitted us together, it held us in some way. And that obviously just unravelled through all of the scandals and all of the things that went on. But what's been left behind, he describes these epidemic levels of alienation. There are no end, he said, because of all this alienation, there's no end of organisations popping up to organise and do fundraising bike rides, or a charity dip in the nip, all of these kind of things that pop up now that we're supposed to again feel like we're a community. Make us feel like we're part of something again. So charity bike rides, dip in the nip. I've never done, nor ever will do a dip in the nip. I don't care what it's for or what the charity is. And he says this, but it's going to take a little bit more than bikes and bare behinds for us to get a proper handle on these symptoms of our Irish listlessness and dissatisfaction. What is it, he asks, that propels our pathological pill popping and our predilection for compulsion-propelled dead ends? In other words, why do we keep going after dead ends? Why is it that we've bought into this new type of society where it's all to do with party, it's all to do with fun? The idea that entertainment now is supposed to be achievement. What was achievement before was you grew up, you went to school, you got married, you stuck at it with your family through thick and thin, you sent your family on to the next generation, and that's still the truth. That's still what's happening. But the mood music is telling us that we're not fulfilled unless we're entertained. Everything is about entertainment. You have to be stimulated in some way. I don't know if you see these ads for the new phones. They wreck my head. Every ad. It's always young, beautiful people going, cool, taking photographs of themselves going, ooh, and sending them all around on various new social. And you're thinking, do people really live like that? You see people going, Hey, look at me, I'm here. You know, and you're looking at it, and I don't know about you, but the older I get, I'm looking at it and going, I really am. This ship is sailing away from me. I can't do that stuff. But you see, it's what has replaced what was once the thing that held us together was religion. It was a faith in God. And what seems to have replaced it is this idea that entertainment and being entertained, being stimulated, is the new drug. He says, what is it that keeps driving us to be stimulated and entertained? Do you not see that all of the time? It's just this instant. Let's always be having fun. Let's always be being entertained. What is it? He said, could it be, as the secularists and the atheists would have us believe, that all of this dissatisfaction and all of this anxiety are nothing more than being simply human? In other words, what the atheists say to you is, you know what, that's just the way you are. Don't even search for meaning. Don't ask questions about anything like this. Don't ask questions about it. Even asking the question is a superstition that will lead you to a belief. That's what they say. I was in a place in Pfizer's, and they had this big tree on the wall where you put proverbs up. So all these, you get a leaf and you put a proverb up, and all the different proverbs are up. And I seen this proverb, and it had, superstition is a magnet that pulls you in the direction of your beliefs. Now that's classic, straight down the middle, modern secularist thinking. Tarnished would have said amen to that one. He would have really believed that. Superstition is a magnet that brings you in the direction of your beliefs. In other words, to question what it is that's inside you, to question why it is that you're dissatisfied, to question why it is that having the latest phone and the latest gizmo and the latest this and the latest that and all of the jazz that none of you people have. I can see by looking at you don't have it. But to have it all is... yes, yeah, we're just the have-nots. And if we had it, we wouldn't know what to do with it. That's why Tara and Leah are here. They could help us with all of that stuff. But... this thing was up. Superstition is a magnet that pulls you in the direction of your beliefs. And I wrote underneath it, does that include the belief that superstition is a magnet that pulls you in the direction of your beliefs? You see, it's all belief. It's all belief. It's all faith. It's all a hope in something. And where we place our hope and where we place our faith really matters, because it either satisfies us or it kills us. Hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. If our hope is in endlessly being entertained or endless acquisition of whatever it is that we want to acquire as the thing to bring an end to that anxiety that's deep inside us, if that's what our hope is, well, then that hope is going to disappoint us. So it matters where our hope is. And I, for one, would say to the secularist and the atheist who tells me not to bother, not to even think about asking the question about meaning, I would say to him, well, that's nonsense, isn't it? It's just as much nonsense as him saying there is no such thing as the resurrection. It's the very same result. So I would say to him, you know what? I don't like your gospel. I don't like your message. I don't like the idea that I'm just a piece of soulless carbon and that when I search for meaning, it's just some superstition that's going on in my head. Here's how he finishes his article. He's saying, could it be that the atheists are right? And then he says this, or could it be, and he says this now, whisper it very softly now, could it be symptomatic of what the 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal called the God-shaped hole in each of us? Could it be that we've thrown out the Christian baby with the Catholic bathwater? Could it be that Christianity is the answer to what ails us all? And you know what? I think for the first time in a long time, going right against the tide of this so-called clever dick secularism thinking that we have out there, that mocks the search for meaning, that ridicules people of faith, that wants to tell people of faith that they are just superstitious idiots. For the first time to hear somebody say, could it be that we've thrown Jesus out with the Catholic bath water? Could Christianity be the answer to all that ails us? That's interesting, isn't it? The disciples on that first Easter morning had seen the end of all of their hopes when Jesus was crucified. Just because they lived 2,000 years ago doesn't mean that they were idiots or fools. That's what's called chronocentrism. Ethnocentrism is my ethnic group is just better just because I'm white. That's ethnocentrism. Just because I'm white, I'm better and more intelligent than any other race. Chronocentrism is just because I live in this era, I'm more intelligent than the people who lived in it. It's foolishness. They were just the same as we are. They were able to evaluate just as well as we were. I would like to suggest that they were able to evaluate and think things through a whole lot more clearly than we can, because we live in the world of apps and 22-second television shows that split at 11 minutes. So you can run and make a cup of tea and come back down. But, we live in this soundbite world. I would suggest that the people in those days thought longer, harder, deeper, and had more time on their hands to figure out what was really real and what was really imagined. But on that first Easter morning, these disciples had seen the end of their hope when Jesus was crucified. For them, and actually for us, the message of Christianity is that Jesus embodies hope. The person of Jesus, who Jesus is the embodiment of hope. Who he is. More than what he says. Who he is and what he does is the embodiment of hope. Jesus, for them, embodied the answer to what was the God-shaped hole in their hearts and had given meaning to their lives. His ministry, Jesus' ministry 2,000 years ago, brought dignity and honour to the broken and the disenfranchised. Here's the deal. It was Mary Magdalene who first arrived at the tomb with some other women. This woman Mary has been maligned throughout the centuries as saying they identify Mary as with the prostitute, the woman who was caught in adultery and all these things. There's no biblical evidence for it. But here's the deal. It's Mary Magdalene who was a disciple of Jesus, and she would have witnessed one of the most amazing acts and one of the most amazing graces of God that Jesus ever done when he rescued a woman caught in adultery from a cruel death. In those days, we had this a few weeks ago, if you were a woman, you weren't barely even got a chance to speak. If you were a Jewish woman, the Jewish Pharisees said to the Jewish husband, don't spend much time talking with a woman or you'll be in danger of hell. And that was even to your wife. There you go. So, seriously, that's what they said. They said if a man spends too much time talking to his wife, he'd be in danger of hell. So that was a Jewish wife. So that certainly gets that you got There you go. I won't get involved, Jackie. I support you in this. I'll counsel you. But it's Mary Magdalene who goes, and here's a woman. Just picture this scene. Mary Magdalene, the disciples, they've been with this Jesus. They've seen him do things that has dignified them, that has empowered them and franchised their lives, that were completely disenfranchised by the religious leaders who said things like I just said, who controlled every aspect of life, by the Roman occupying forces who took more taxes off them than they could bear to pay, who had almost nothing going for them. And Jesus hung around with them. On one occasion, a woman who was found caught in adultery, which in those days meant that you could be stoned to death, no question, taken out to be stoned to death. They were about to stone this woman to death, and they put a question to Jesus, kind of, what would you do here? The law of Moses says she should be stoned to death. Jesus' response was, let him who without sin cast the first stone. And one by one they put the stones down. And that woman was rescued. This showed just the heart of God for the disenfranchised. It showed the heart of God for those who had no hope, for those for whom nobody would stand up. The heart of God was fully encapsulated in this moment. And this would have been in Mary Magdalene's mind. It would have been in the disciples' mind. This incredibly gracious, loving Son of God who healed the sick, who fed the hungry, who raised the dead, who justified the sinner, who became the friend of sinners, was dead. And all that's left for Mary when she's approaching the grave, the tomb of her hope, all that's left for her is to go in and to kiss all those hopes goodbye. To kiss goodbye the hope of dignity that Jesus brought. To kiss goodbye the hope of acceptance that he brought. To kiss goodbye their hope of a future, of security, of companionship, of love. They had the hope of a life worth living when they were with Jesus. They were no longer living for themselves. They were living for Jesus. They had the hope of a life worth living. Everything was there for them. Everything. But the cross ripped it away. And all that's left for Mary on that morning is to go and give one final act of thanksgiving, to wrap his body in spices, to keep him in dignity in his death. That's all that's left. She goes to kiss those hopes goodbye, and then she hears the greatest words of hope ever spoken. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. He has risen. So this morning I'm going to ask the same question. Could it be true? Could Christianity have the answer after all? The disciples initially treated her testimony as nonsense. They heard it the same way as the smart aleck people in our day hear it, and they said it's just nonsense. And they had more reason to believe it, but they said it was nonsense until they encountered Jesus. Until they encountered the risen Lord. The death he died once for all. He died it once for all. And when they encountered Jesus, their whole lives were completely transformed, completely changed. They went from fear and hiding away to proclaiming that this Jesus of Nazareth, this man that they had spent 3 years with, was really actually the Son of God, that he died and he rose again. And they gave their lives for this message. We like, again, with our clever television shows, to debunk all of this stuff. But why, oh why, would these people... Here's what Nero done to the early Christians in AD 60. He put them on a pole. He impaled them on a stake. He dipped them in oil. He set them on fire. And he called them candles. Do you know, in all of the literature that is written against Christianity, they cannot find not one piece of ancient evidence where it says, you know, James, Jesus' brother, recanted and said, actually, no, it's all a spoof. Or Paul or somebody else wrote and said, actually, you know what, it's all a spoof. That's the kind of thing that you would do when you're under the pressure of death, isn't it? When your kids are, you would, you know, if you were going to spoof it, you might spoof it until you're going to die. When Joseph Smith started, his spoof religion, Mormonism, saying that an angel gave him this stuff, the two witnesses that were there with him, there was Joseph Smith and two witnesses, when their lives were in danger, they said it's a spoof. First time death came to their door, they said, hey, it was a spoof. We didn't see any of this stuff. Not one of the ancient witnesses recorded in the scriptures is there any other document that says they recanted of their belief. They died for their beliefs. Why? Because it's true. It's true. It's objectively, really true, and it matters. And it matters to you, and it matters to your life, and it matters to where you have invested your hope. It matters where, if you put your hope into things, or if you're going to put your hope into the Lord. People, and all of us who live for ourselves, this is what the secularist says, live for yourself. It doesn't matter. Just live for yourself. We all know that doesn't work. I'm going to finish with this one reading. Here's what these disciples wrote about Jesus. Here's what they done when they met with the risen Lord. And he's alive today and he's here. They were asked why. Why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they going about putting their lives at risk? Some of them had already been martyred. Some of them had already lost children. Some of them had lost homes, property. Some of them had been completely driven out of the towns that they grew up in. And here's what the Apostle Paul wrote when he was asked why. In 2 Corinthians 5, and I'm finishing with this. He says, "For Christ's love compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died." And he died for all. That's us here in this room. That those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. Isn't that just a great message? You don't have to live just for yourself anymore. You don't have to live for selfish ends anymore. Selfishness is sin, and it causes you pain. It causes you to judge others. It causes you to resent people. It causes you to be greedy. It causes you to look after your own self and nothing else. And Jesus died so that you never have to live like that anymore, but you can now live for Jesus. You no longer have to live in selfishness, but for him who died for you. And listen to what Paul says here. He says, "So from now on we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Because if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. All this is from God." He says this is why we do this. The love of God compels us. You don't have to live for selfishness anymore. You don't have to live in that rat race anymore. You can live in the freedom that Jesus gave you. Forgiven. He's with you always. You don't have to live for that selfishness anymore. And we don't look at people the same way anymore because we're free from selfishness. When we see a woman who's about to be stoned to death, we can do what Jesus done and extend a hand of mercy and grace to her. We can live selflessly. That's new creation. They're the people that Jesus came to create. Not selfish people, but selfless people. That's the community that Jesus came to form. Not a selfish religious community that Christianity became, but a selfless community who freely gives what they freely received. Who live for Jesus and the truth that he is alive. New creation. Isn't that great, isn't it? See, that's just the gospel. You can start again. You can have a fresh start with God in your heart. Here's how Paul finishes this. He says, all this is from God. We didn't make this stuff up. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting men's sins against them, and he has committed to us the ministry of reconciliation. I want you to know that God has reconciled the world to himself in his beautiful Son Jesus, not counting men's sins against them. That means as you approach Jesus, or he approaches you, he, although he knows everything about you, is not counting your sin against you. The next time you have judgment in your heart, the next time you have judgment and you're finding people out because you know this, that and the other thing about them and you know how wrong they are, Jesus would say to you, I'm not holding their sin against them, why are you? You need the Spirit of God to live that way. You need the life of Jesus to live that way. This is not religion. This is the relationship of a new creation in Jesus Christ. A new community of selfless people. People who live free from selfishness. Who look for opportunities to give and to bless and to forgive. Why? Because there by the grace of God go I. Is that not freedom? Is that not freedom?
Amen.
Is that not freedom?
Yes.
Oh man, that's freedom. It's truth. Jesus is alive.
Amen.
And he loves you so dearly. He died to bring you to himself. That you no longer live for yourself, but live for him who died for you. We are therefore, Paul says, Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. Be reconciled to God. I'm going to ask you to put your hands up, but I know God has touched your heart. I know it. I know every one of you here have been moved by the Spirit of Jesus because he's here. And Paul is saying in this reading, it's as if God is appealing through me. He's made everyone who would say yes to Jesus an ambassador for him. And he makes that appeal through those who believe in Jesus. He is for you. He is risen. He's able to take everything that was meant for bad in your life and turn it around for good. He'll never leave you or forsake you. That's Jesus. That's the gospel. That's why Easter Sunday is the best message of all. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen.